Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 ways of adding slider inside React.js. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a custom slider using React.js and Tailwindcss, and then I'm going to show you how to implement slider using select slider, and finally, you will learn how to implement slider using sweeper slider. So now let's get started. Okay guys, I'm inside my VS Code. As you can see, I have already generated the React application with the help of Vite. So as you can see, we have this app.jsx. I just added this hello world in here inside this index.css. I just target this all elements and just remove extra margin and padding from here, and you can see we have this main.jsx. Okay, so now I just open the terminal and run this npm run dev. Okay, now let's open this application. I'm gonna move it here. As you can see, here is my text. So I have already opened these 2 libraries documentation here, but at first I'm going to implement the custom slider with the help of React.js itself. So I'm going to close the terminal, and inside this source I'm going to have a new folder and call it components, and let's have our first file. I'm going to call this custom slider. Okay, let's generate this React code here, and I'm going to import it inside this app.jsx. Now you can see here is my text. So at first, let's bring everything in the middle. Okay, here is my text. So at first, I'm going to bring everything in the middle. So I'm going to give a class name for this custom slider div, and I'm going to call that slider container. Okay, I'm going to copy this class name, and let's open this index.css. So I'm going to write here display grid, and place item should be center. Now we need to give it a width of 100% and a height of 100 view height. Okay, now you can see the text is in the middle. So at first we need to have some items to display in this slider. Okay, so we are going to generate some dummy data in here. So I'm going to write here array.from. Inside this object, we need to specify the length of the data that we want to generate. I'm gonna go for this 10, and now we are going to loop through these items. So I just write here .for each. We are going to get each and every index from here, and up here I'm going to have an empty array. So I'm going to call this data, which is by default this empty array. So now inside here I'm going to write here data.push and this index. Okay, so now if I console log this data, as you can see we have an array of 10 items. Okay, now we can map through this data. Okay, so down here I'm going to add a new div with the class name of slider, and inside here I'm going to map through this data. So data.map, we are going to get each and every item. Okay, and we are going to add this paragraph here. Now let's print this item inside here. Okay, as you can see, here are all my indexes, but it's starting from 0. I want it to start from 1, so I just add this +1 in here. Okay, now you can see it's starting from 1. Alright, now let's style it. So for this paragraph, I'm going to give a class name of slide. Now let's open this index.css again. Okay, so at first, let's target the slider. We are going to give a display flex to this. Align items should be center. Okay, they are beside each other, and now let's target this slide here. I'm gonna give a width of, let's say, 40 rem and a height of 18 rem. Okay, I'm gonna give a background color. It should be gray. Okay, now let's bring these numbers in the middle. So for that, I'm going to add a display of grade, and place items should be center. Okay, now you can see we have a long list of our items in here, but we want to display only the first items, and the rest of our items will be displayed when we increment and decrement it. Okay, so now what we need to do is, I'm going to delete this console log here, and down here we need to add a new use state hook. So I'm going to call this active slide. Okay, and it will be the first index of this data by default. So we are going to have the first index of this data inside this use state hook. So the reason I'm getting this first index is to set some condition. So we are going to set a condition inside this paragraph. If the item is matching with this active slide, then we want to display that item. So in here, I'm going to copy this class and change this to be a temporary string. Okay, now in here we are going to say if this active slide is equal to item plus 1, of course, then we are going to add this active class. Otherwise, we want to add this empty string. Okay, so we are going to hide this paragraph by default, and then inside this active class we are going to add a display of flex. So now I'm going to open this index.css again. As you can see, we have this display grade inside this slide, so I'm gonna change this to be display none. You can see we don't have any item. And now let's target this active class here, and we are going to add a display of grade, and let's move this plus items here. Okay, the problem is this item plus 1, so I just get rid of this plus 1 in here because we are going to display the first index, which is 0. Okay, so now if I refresh the page, you can see here is the first index of our array. So now we need to have two arrows in the left and right side. So for that, we are going to install React icons. I have already installed that. All you need to do is just write in the terminal. So I'm going to open the terminal and open a new terminal here. Just write npm install React icons. Okay, I have already installed that. So now let's open it inside browser. So React icons. And you can see they are coming from the same source, so I just copy and delete this one. Okay, so now in both sides we need to have these arrows, so I'm going to add a button here, and let's add this one. Now let's copy this button and add it in here. Okay, and let's change this icon. Now you can see we have these two buttons, but we need to add some spaces between them. So let's open this index.css, and if you remember, inside this slider we added the display flex, so we can add a gap of, let's say, 2 rem. Now you can see they have enough spaces between them. So now I'm going to target this slider and a button here. I'm gonna give a padding of 1 rem, and I'm gonna give it a cursor pointer. Okay, now you can see we have this button here. Let's increase the size of the icons. So I'm gonna write here font size of 1.3 rem. Okay, Now we need to display our items down here also, so we can click them and display them here. So what we need to do is we need to add a new component. So I'm gonna call this lower slider. Okay, and we need to receive our data here, and let's add it down here. So make sure to add it inside this slider container. So I'm gonna add it here and lower slider. Now let's pass this data here. Okay, now you can see here is my slider, but actually I don't want to add any spaces between them. So for that, let's open this index.css again. So I believe it's because of this 100 of view height. So I'm going to add this component and this slider in another div to avoid that much spaces. Okay, and yeah, that's it. So now inside this lower slider, we are going to map through this data again. So I'm going to map through this data.map. We are going to get each and every item here, and let's add this paragraph, items +1 item, and we need to have key. I forget to add key here, and the key should be item also. Okay, and let's add this key here also. Okay, now let's check it. As you can see, we have our items here, but we wanna bring them in the middle. So let's give it a class name of lower slider, and I'm going to open this index.css again. Okay, and let's give it a display of flex. Align items should be center, and justify content is going to be center. Okay, and let's add some margin. So margin is going to be 1 rem and 0. Okay, alright, now let's style each and every items here. So let's actually copy this class from here and target this paragraph. We are gonna give a weight of 7 rem and a height of 5 rem, and let's give it a background color of gray, but this time I want to make it a little bit brighter. Okay, they are here, but we don't want to add this long. Instead, we are going to have a bar in here. Okay, so for that, inside this lower slider, I'm going to have a weight of 42 rem, and let's move this margin 0 auto, and also we are going to have an overflow X of auto. Okay, now let's check it. As you can see, we have this bar. Now let's move it in the middle. So we need to change this to be auto, not 0. Okay, now you can see we have this bar in here. Okay, since we have a problem, we can't see the first 3 items, so I just get rid of this 2 line of code in here, and now you can see we have all our items. Now let's place these numbers in the middle. So inside here, I'm going to add display flex. Align items should be center, and justify content is going to be center. Okay, let's have some gap. So I have added this display flex, and gap is going to be 1 rem. Alright, now you can see we have a little spaces between them. Alright guys, our slider is ready. Now let's work on the functionalities. So at first, let's increment this slider. So I'm going to close this index.css, and in here I need to define 3 functions. I'm going to write slide to the left or slide left. It's gonna be an arrow function. Let's copy and paste that, and it should be slide right, And finally, we are going to write here select slide. So this function is going to be for this paragraph in here. Okay, so now let's implement this slide to left. Okay, now inside here we need to set this active slide to a new data, and actually I'm going to change this default value to be only 1 because we can have access to this index inside this two left and right buttons. So instead of this active slide, we are going to write data with index of this active slide. Okay, now you can see we have this slide 2, but if I pick this 0 here, you can see it's slide 1. Okay, so now inside here we are going to get the previous value and just -1. Okay, now let's add this function here. So I'm gonna add an onClick function and just add this function here. So the problem with this logic is that it will go down 0. So now if I click this button, you can see we will lose this slider because the current number of this active slide will become -1. So to avoid this problem, now let's refresh the page. So in here we need to set a condition. We need to say if previous is greater than 0, we are going to minus this previous by 1. Otherwise we want to print this 0. So with this logic, we are not let this previous to come down this 0 number. Now let's click it again. You can see it is 0 now and we cannot go down 0. Now let's implement this increment button. So I'm going to open this slide to right and paste it here. Now let's add it inside this button. Okay, so I'm going to delete it from here. Now in here we need to implement a logic that it shouldn't go up this data length. So as much as data that we have, it shouldn't exceed that much. So at first we need to set a condition here. If previous is less than this data.length -1, we want to increment it by 1. Otherwise we want to set the value of this previous to be data.length -1. So we are not letting the user to increment more than the length of this data. So if I click it here, you can see I am able to increment it, and once it reaches to 8, if I try to increment it, as you can see, I cannot increment more than this 10 because this 10 is the length of my data, which is 10. Okay, so now let's implement this bottom slider. Actually I want to have some padding between this bar and my items. So let's open this index.css here, and so inside this lower slider I'm going to have a padding bottom of 1 rem. Okay, now we have a little spaces between the bar and the items. Now let's implement this lower slider. So for that we are going to add some onClick to each one of these boxes. So I'm going to open this lower slider, and actually let's copy this function. We don't need this function here, and just add it here. Okay, and inside this one, at first we need to get this active slide, only this set active slide here. So I'm gonna pass it to this component. Now let's receive it here, and inside here we are going to set this active slide to be indexed. Now let's receive this index from our function, and we are going to add an onClick function here, and let's add this function and just pass this item here. So if I click this 2, you can see the 2 will be printed here, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so to be able to see the active box, I want to add some extra colors here. So let's open this index.css again, and in here I'm going to have lower active, and we are going to add a background color of gray, but it should be a little bit brighter. Okay, now inside this paragraph let's have a class name, and we need to set a condition. Again, we need to bring this active slide from here and paste it here. Okay, and let's receive it here. So now we need to set a condition. Okay, and otherwise we are going to have another background color. So as you can see inside this paragraph, we have added this background color. So I'm gonna copy this from here, and let's duplicate this class name. Okay, I'm going to add it here, and for this class name I'm going to change this to be lower item. Okay, so now let's save it and add this lower item class here. Now if I save this file, as you can see, the one which is selected has a little bit brighter color and the rest of them has darker colors. So now here we get a problem. So if I increment to the left side, you can see this bar is not scrolling to the right side. Now let's fix this problem. So let's close this index.css, and inside here we are going to have a useRef for this div, because we are going to target each and every paragraph inside this div. Okay, so this useRef hook will help us invoke this div. So I'm going to have a ref in here. It should be equal to useRef. Now let's pass this ref here equal to ref. Okay, so now inside this useEffect hook, let's define a useEffect hook. Let's actually first console log this ref. So ref dot current. Now if I inspect the browser here, as you can see, it's displaying this div and also all the items inside this div. So now inside this div, we need to find the active item which is currently displaying in this slider. Okay, so in here, let's remove this. I'm going to write active slide. Okay, and actually it is a duplicate name. Let's call this slide 1, which is equal to this ref.current, and .children. We are going to target the children of this div with the index of this active slide. Okay, so now if I console log this active slide 1, as you can see, this number 1 box is our current slide. So if I click this 3 in here, okay, let's console log it also. So if I click this 4 here, you can see this 4 is our active slide. If I click this 2, you can see we have this 2 as active slide. Okay, so now what we need to do is, I'm going to get rid of this one, and inside this useEffect hook we need to first check if we have any active slide 1. Then we are going to say active slide 1 dot scroll into view. Okay, and inside this object we need to have this behavior. It should be smooth, and also the block is going to be center. Alright, and we are going to pass this active slide to this empty dependency. Okay, so based on this we are going to run this logic. Now let's check it. So if I try to increment, as you can see, our bar is moving according to this active class. So now if I try to slide it to the left, you can see our bar is moving accordingly. Alright guys, we are done with this custom slider. Now let's move to the select slider. So as you can see, I am inside select slider documentation, and down here we have an example of sliding, and you can see there is a code. Okay, now let's open the docs page. As you can see, down here we have an installation command, so I'm going to copy and install it. Now we need to add the CSS part of this slider. So we need to install this select carousel. So I'm going to copy this and install it inside my application. And finally, we need to copy this 2 line of code and add it inside this main.jsx. And if you want, you can add this CDN link instead of installing the select carousel. Now down here you can see we have an object called settings. So using this object, we are going to set up the behavior of our slider. Okay, now let's copy this code from here. And I'm gonna make a new folder and component for my slider. Okay, and paste all of these codes here. Now let's add it inside this app.jsx. And let me change the component name here. Alright, now you can see we have this slider inside here, and we need to add our own sliding. So for instance, I'm going to add some images, so let's have them here. Now we need to map through this image, and we are going to display that inside this image tag. So down here, instead of these divs, we are going to add these new images. Now you can see we have all our images. So now let's style them. So at first we are going to have a container class. Let's add it inside the CSS, and we are going to give it a weight and also margin of 0 auto. Now you can see we have a little spacing from the left and right side, but our images are still in need of some designs. I'm going to target this image and give it a weight and a height. And object fit should be cover. Okay, now you can see our images are looking good. Alright, as you can see we have only one image in every slide, but I want to have 3 images. So inside this setting object, as you can see we have slides to show. I'm going to change this to be 3. Now you can see we have 3 images. So using the slide to scroll, we are going to specify how many items should be scrolled. So I'm going to change it to be 2. Okay, now let's make the slider to be autoplay. So I'm going to add here autoplay to be true. Now you can see our slider is sliding automatically. And now I'm going to decrease the height of these images. Okay, now our images are better. So let's add space between them. So to add spacing between them, I'm going to inspect the browser. And in here we need to find the container of this select slider. So I found this container class, and if I add a display flex to it and gap of 0.5 frame, you can see we have spaces between them. Okay, so I'm going to copy this all class from here and add it inside my CSS. And I'm going to write the display flex and gap again inside this class. Okay, now as you can see we have some gap between them, and we can increase this gap. Now let's work on these dots. Now let's see how we can change these dots. So I'm going to find this dot again. As you can see, this one is the class name for select dots. So I'm going to copy this here. And if I give it a background color, you can see this is the container class of these dots. So now I'm going to move this to the left side. So I'm going to give it a weight of fit content. And it should be important because we are going to change the initial CSS style of select slider. Alright, now let's find each one of these dots. As you can see, this class name is belong to each single of these dots. So inside this content we have this dot, as you can see here. Okay, so I'm going to copy this class from here and add it inside the CSS. So if I give it a color of red, now you can see our active dot will have this color. So now let's get rid of these dots. So I'm gonna write here content and empty string. You can see we don't have these dots anymore. And now let's give our own styling. So I'm going to copy this select dot, li and button and add it down here. So I'm gonna give it a width of 2 rem, height of 1 pixel, background color black, and we need to add those important, otherwise it will not work. Alright, now you can see we have them here, but we need to add some spaces between them. So again we need to write display flex and gap. Okay, now I'm going to increase the height of these dots, and also we need to give a border radius of 50 pixels here. Alright, so let's decrease this gap. Now you can see they are looking better, but we need to target the active dot here. So I'm going to try to find the active class. As you can see we have this select active, so I'm gonna copy this here, and let's change the background color to be red. Okay, we need to give this button, otherwise this background color will be shaded for the parent. Alright, now it's looking better. Alright guys, our dots are ready. Now let's see how we can add our custom arrows. So down here we need to have a div with 2 buttons, and let's add these icons inside. Okay, they are here, and we need to move that to the right side. So let's give it a class name, and inside CSS I'm going to give a display flex and justify content to be flex end. Okay, now it's on the right side, so I'm gonna target each button and give it a width and a height and cursor pointer. Alright, let's give them some spaces. Okay, so now let's add our functions. So to target our slider we need to have a useref hook. So I'm going to call this arrowref, and it's coming from useref. So now let's pass it to our slider. Okay, now let's add our function. So I'm going to have a function here, and we are going to receive the button name here. Okay, let's pass this function into our buttons here, and our first button is going to be decrement. It is the name of the button, and the second button is going to be increment. So now inside this function we need to check if the button is equal to increment, then we are going to increment the slider. So inside this condition we need to say arrowref.current.select next. Okay, now you can see our next sliding is working perfectly. Otherwise we are going to say arrowref.current.select prep. Okay, as you can see our prep button is also working. Alright guys, now let's make the slider to be responsive. As you can see we have a lot of padding and responsive part. So now let's decrease these paddings. So I'm gonna open the CSS again, and at first we need to have a margin top of 3 rem. Okay, and now we need to have a media query, and we need to target the maximum width of 999 pixels, and we are going to add the class name here and just increase the width. Now you can see we have less spacing. Alright, now to make this slider to be responsive, we are going to add some other stuff inside our settings object. So I'm going to open the documentation again, and as you can see inside this responsive page, we have this responsive array. So I'm going to copy all of them from here and just add it inside the settings object. Okay, so we are going to add some breakdowns inside here. So in this size, we are going to make the slider to show only 2 images, and slice to show should be 2, and also we are going to slide only 1 item each time. Okay, so now as you can see, we are going to show only 2 images in this size. Alright, now let's decrease the size again, and in this point we are going to show only 1 image. So I'm going to copy and paste this breakpoint again, and let's change this breakpoint size. Also we are going to remove these dots, so it should be false, and also we just show only 1 image. Okay, now you can see we are going to show different number of images at every size. Alright guys, that's it. That's how you can implement select slider inside your project. Now let's see how you can implement sweeper slider. So I'm gonna open the sweeper slider documentation here, and as you can see inside this doc, we are going to have this sweeper React. As you can see in here, we have this command to install the library, and down here you can see this is how you can use this library inside your React application. So now let's install the library here. Okay, and to add the CSS, you don't have to install anything. Just add this line of code inside this main.jsx. Okay, now let's make a new folder and a new component for this sweeper slider, and I'm gonna copy all of this code from here. Okay, now let's change the component name. Okay, and I'm gonna import it inside this app.jsx. Now you can see we have a new slider down here, but instead of the text, I'm going to display some images. So now we are going to export these images from select slider component. Again, we are going to map through these images, so I just copy and paste that. And also we are going to add the sweeper slide inside our map function. Instead, we are going to add the display images here. Okay, now you can see we have all our images. So down here, as you can see, inside the sweeper, we are going to customize our slider. So now let's add this class name inside sweeper slide. We are going to add a section here, and again we need to have a sweeper slider class for this also. So now we are going to add this class name inside index.css. Okay, and we need to have weight of 70%, margin 0 auto. Okay, and for responsive part, we are going to add this media query. I just copy and paste that here. Now let's target this sweeper slider image, and let's give it a weight and a height. Alright, now they are looking better. We need to set the object weight to be cover. Okay, now our images are looking better. So using the space between, we can decrease the spaces between them. Alright, now they are looking similar to each other. And if you want, you can even make it to be a card. So for example, inside here I can add a heading 2 for the title. You can see here is the card title, and we can have a description here. You can see here are my descriptions, and you can add a button also. Now you can see I just add a cart slider in here. So this is how you can add cart using sweeper slider. And also we can change the design of the cart. So I'm gonna open the sweeper slider documentation. And if I scroll down, as you can see, we have this look at available demos. So I'm gonna click this demos here. And inside here we have different kind of demos inside sweeper slider. So you can take a look at each one of them. Okay. But in this video I'm going to implement this slider. So to understand the slider customization, just click this React button here, and it will open a new tab inside the browser, and in here you can see how to implement this slider. So all you need to do is just add this effect, which is cover flow, okay, and just import the CSS of this effect. And now you can see this is the customization of this slider effect. So I'm gonna copy this all code from here and just add it here, okay. And finally we need to have a module here and add our effect module inside it. So at first we need to import this effect module. Let's copy them from the documentation. We don't need this pagination, okay. And if I refresh the page, now you can see our slider is similar to the one inside the documentation. Alright guys, now let's add these dots. So we need to import this pagination module from sweeper module, and I'm going to add it inside these modules. And also you need to import the CSS for this pagination. So I'm gonna copy and paste that inside my code. Okay. Now we need to add pagination property inside this component and set it to be true. Alright, now you can see we have this pagination. Alright, now we can add some arrows to slide to the left and right side. So we are going to import this navigation module, and again we need to import the CSS of this navigation. We need to have this navigation to be true, okay, and also we need to add it inside this module. Now you can see we have the arrow in the left and the right side, so I can slide to the left and right side. Okay guys, you can implement any other design from the documentation. Now let's make it responsive. So I'm going to open the documentation and just click this ratio breakpoints here. Let's open it here, and as you can see we have some breakpoints similar to the select slider. So I'm going to copy all of them from here, but we don't need the space between them, so I'm going to get rid of all of them. Okay, now let's inspect the browser here, so we can customize how many images we can show in each slide. Okay guys, now it's looking better. So as you can see, our dots are not clickable. All you need to do is just open a new object inside this pagination and make this clickable to be true. Now you can see our dots are clickable. Alright guys, that's it. That's how you can implement sweeper slider inside React.js. I hope this video was helpful for you. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like the video, leave a comment and give a subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.